You live in the U.S., right? I used to live in Michigan. I've since moved from Michigan. I live in New York City. This is not at all what I was expecting in terms of an audience, but it's good. I'm not upset. Oh, that's right. They haven't even gotten in yet, right? Oh. Doing events is hard. I used to run an anime convention, Yumacon in Detroit. It's very difficult. A lot of line management. Yeah, in the line coming outside. Oh, just to hear. Okay, that's fine with me. Yep. No, cool. Do I have a link? What's the link for? Oh, I can't use my phone. Yeah, but if someone could tweet the live stream, that'd be cool. Of course, it's way too early. 3 in the morning in New York, so no one's gonna. But yeah, like tagging, adding. Oh, I think I gave you guys my Twitter handle, so my Twitter handle's probably like in the thing or whatever. It's yeah, AFDUDLEY. No. So, are you ready? Okay, so. All right, hi everybody. My name is Rick Dudley. I work on Ethereum projects. I'm going to talk to you guys for a little bit about things I don't like about the Ethereum ecosystem, in particular certain design decisions that were made early on, certain governance issues that I think are particular to the ecosystem that could be resolved or mediated or fixed. And then if I feel like it, I'll talk about some of my own projects, but maybe not. I'm pretty secretive. And oh, there is another mic here, so we may instead just sort of do like a Q&A sort of thing when I get tired of talking about stuff I don't like. A little bit about myself. I started programming in 1988 on an Apple II. I was in elementary school. I was very young. In the 90s, I was really into like hacking and 2600, frac, all that kind of stuff. For those of you, and there's so few of you in the audience, do any of you know frac? Okay, two of you, awesome. So yeah, so like smashing the stack for fun and profit was like mind-blowing, like blew my mind, right? And then like while sort of like in middle school, I got into Unix, like 97-ish. I got into like Unix stuff because that was like the cool thing to hack or whatever. And then shortly thereafter, I was working in tech support, systems administration. So I definitely have like a very like sort of like fundamental systems administration background. And then after that, I went to college and I studied computer science, and I maintained an interest in cell phone ringtones as well as you know, basically hacking stuff. So I was doing a lot of work on, I was really interested in botting communities. So like botting on WoW, botting on EVE Online, and engaging in that process. I was like, oh, I shouldn't be able to do a lot of this stuff. Like, the games should be formally defined, and I should be transacting with the server via cryptographically signed messages, and then all the cheating would be instantly detectable. It would still happen. I could send an invalid message, but the server would say, hey, that's an invalid state change, and then not apply that message. And then furthermore, if I'm doing that, I should be able to take a list of those transactions, generate a receipt, have both parties sign the receipt, and I should be able to take that receipt and show it to another server to show that I played this game on server A, present that to server B, or present that to a user. So I filed a patent on what I just described in 2007, so I was thinking about that stuff in 2006. For those of you who are following the provably gaming space, like CryptoKitties and World of Ether and collectible card game stuff, that should sound very similar. What I just described has a lot of similarities to blockchain technology, and so I was working on that before the Bitcoin paper was published. I wasn't a big fan of Bitcoin. I was very skeptical. It felt like a Ponzi scheme. The people I knew it through were kind of shady people, so it was like I didn't really trust it. And then at one point I was working at a data center, and I was reading an article about how FPGAs had been produced for Bitcoin, and I was like, oh, it's obviously centralized then, because like I understood a little bit about how chip manufacturing works, and I was like, oh, well, that's obviously centralizing. And so I never really so that was like during the 2013 big boom. So I went in and I started like looking at Bitcoin and stuff and trying to understand what was going on, and I wasn't super into it. It was crazy. I mean, you're in these weird IRC OTCs, and people are trading at like these weird prices. It was just really weird. So I was like, okay, I got better stuff to do. And then I kept working different odd jobs in IT, and I met some guys who were really big into Doge, and then they invited me to this Ethereum meetup in November 2014 in New York City. So this is all going somewhere, by the way. There is an arc. There is like a theme. Anyway, so I go to this Ethereum meetup, and I don't know anything about Ethereum. I don't know any of the people. I don't know anything that's going on, but it's like most of the core people. So like Yunta, Jeff, Gavin, Vitalik, Joe Lubin was in the back grilling me. There's a lot of people there. And so Vitalik and Gavin give talks, and I sort of raise my hand, and I'm like, do you guys know what Paxos is? And they're like, no, we don't know what Paxos is. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a little worrisome. I was like, how are you guys going to actually have a global network that has these sort of properties that you're describing for decentralized exchange? Because even back then, Gavin was talking about decentralized exchange. And I was like, and they were like, well, and they kind of waved their hands, and I was like, well, I actually work for a private network that facilitates decentralized exchange, so I have some idea, or not decentralized exchange, that was a weird brain fart, but we facilitated high frequency trading. And so I was like, I have some idea of how hard that is. Like, we have a whole company and that's all we do, and it's like, it's really hard to maintain those networks. So like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then they were like, oh, and we have this Turing-complete programming language. And I was like, whoa, that's definitely wrong. And so that was sort of my introduction to Ethereum. And that was sort of my initial analysis of Ethereum, was like, okay, you're not going to have the network guarantees that you want because you want two contradictory guarantees. You want decentralization and you want performance, and those two things traditionally don't go together, especially under the context of anonymity. So if you look at like sort of the mixer networks that were done for email in the 90s, like those things are mad slow, right? And if you look at like other network systems that people use for anonymizing, like Sphinx or Hornet or stuff like that, anything where you're flooding the network with transactions to mask your transactions, those are like very not performant networks. Like that's the whole point. Incidentally, that trade-off between performance and security we see in proof of work as well, right? Like the whole reason designed proof of work, a little history lesson for everyone, was to rate limit spam messages. So fundamentally, proof of work is rate limiting, and so you're always going to have these fundamental scaling issues as long as you use proof of work as an integral component to your system in this sort of undetermined, like it's not that it's undetermined, it's sort of like you're using this really coarse tool everywhere. Like Bitcoin is really clever, but there are some, and this is some things I don't like about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is really clever, but there's some fundamental issues with Bitcoin in that, like for example, when the paper was first published, you could send Bitcoins to IP addresses, right? So obviously, in the minds of the developers, Satoshi, whomever, they didn't think about how much it costs to BGP hijack a network versus how much transactions would be transacted over the Bitcoin network, because BGPing that stuff, like hacking that stuff is easy, and actually exchanges have lost money a mining pool has lost money from a BGP hack, I believe in 2014, but I could be a bit wrong on that date. Feel free to Google me or Google it to correct me. So that was a little rambly at the end there, but that's sort of the main thrust of the issues that I have with Ethereum, is that there were claims that didn't really match the architectural decisions, and the architectural decisions were not made in light of the state of the art. So we can look at, in particular, I think the language stuff and the EVMs, even something like Axlang that was recently released, there's a lot of stuff is obviously, like if you look at our chain or some of the people trying to do static analysis on smart contracts, and I think that that's obviously like fundamentally something that needs to be done. Like conceptually, the idea of a smart contract in the Ethereum context requires that we have some very well-defined behavior that sort of excludes the idea of Turing completeness. Incidentally, the EVM isn't really Turing complete because you have gas, right? Oh, I'm sorry, not gas. Gas is the straw man. It's because you have a stack depth limit because you can only make 1,000 calls in a transaction. It's not an infinite Turing tape, right? That's like a kind of a obvious one. So that one kind of bugs me, because the real security in the VM is not gas. So the other problem with gas, which is something that Zaki pointed out to me, who works with Tendermint very closely and works on a lot of other stuff. Pricing the gas is a bin filling problem. So if you guys are computer science nerds, you know that bin filling is NP hard, and we can pretty much be sure through the process that's been used to set the gas prices that there's always going to be a gas price that is wrong, which is like pretty awesome to think about from a security perspective. Like, one of these things is wrong, you don't know which one. Like, that's not really the best place to be from a security perspective. So we don't really need gas as we have it, especially given that we never really know formally that it's correct. Like, there's no way to really formally verify the gas price. So, why do we have the gas price if we don't need it and we can't formally verify it? And I think that that's something that really could have been figured out, like, just by like asking for help. Like that wasn't like a complicated, like, esoteric thing to figure out. I was thinking of something, because this is all extemporaneous, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. Yeah, so I mean, the gas pricing is frustrating. I think that we could have just used a modified version of JavaScript and gotten 90% of the way of where we're at with Solidity, and then had a better, like, richer, more robust tooling. Obviously, EWASM is sort of moving in that direction. I'm a big proponent of the EWASM stuff. And if you think about how I guess a quick, maybe not everyone knows what the approach for EWASM is, but you basically take programming languages, you compile them down to WASM, then you have a whole bunch of metering tools and gas and analysis tools that are applied on the WASM, not applied in your own one cool dude in Germany made your language. But you have like a whole community of people working on WASM, so that's like way better. And then obviously you're leveraging all of the technology in the JavaScript VMs or the WASM VMs that already exist today. I mean, even LLVM can be a backend. There's a huge amount of tech that can be leveraged there because because you've separated the metering and you have a proper separation of concerns. So that's those are some of the things I don't like about Ethereum. Some other things I don't like about Ethereum, because there's kind of a lot of them. I guess I didn't really explain what I do. So the context of why all these criticisms, where they all come from, is sort of confused or missing. I've consulted on over 20 projects over the last 2 years. I started after that meeting I had where I met Joe Lubin. I ended up working at Consensus for 4 months from February of 2015 until like around June, July of 2015, depending on how you count. And in that time, I worked on something called, I called it Ether Poker. It's now called Virtue Poker. So I developed a sub-networking protocol there, is what I called it. It's basically an application-specific state channel, multi-party state channel. So you could also think of it as a side chain, depending on which set of semantics you're using when you're talking about it. I have a really bad habit of making stuff and then not talking about it. So I'm trying to correct that. But yeah, I made that and didn't really talk about it. Didn't really think that running the poker business as a business is very complicated, and I was really interested in running businesses. So that's part of why I was happy to leave it when I left Consensus. So that's a project I did there. I worked at Monex for a year, and then like I said, I've consulted for a lot of different companies. Probably the biggest ones would be like Omisego, which has like $1 billion market cap or something like that, doing decentralized exchange stuff. So and then my company is like an advising consulting company. So I advise people on mechanism design, and then I actually go find developers and actually try to build the thing. And in that actually try to build the thing process is where a lot of these warts in Ethereum really come up. I mean, I'm not going to talk about, well, I guess I am going to talk about, because I just said I'm not going to, I am going to talk about some of the weirdness around just even figuring out account balances. Like something super simple, like what is the balance of this account? You know, when you are rewarded your, in Bitcoin, when you get the mining reward, it's the first transaction in the block, and it's just a normal it's a special transaction, but it's mostly like a normal transaction. When you get the reward in Ethereum, it just goes to your account. It's like literally a completely separate object type that has to be parsed out of the block, separate from the rest of the transactions. So if you want to see if an account's balance has gone up or down between blocks, you also have to technically make sure that it didn't get a mining reward, which is like, I mean, it just makes me want to punch myself in the face just thinking about that. Because for me, the fundamental concern around that is like, well, what was the discussion that was being had around the design? Like, how did we get to a point where, like, did someone actually try to use this system before, like, during the process of building it? And that brings me to another issue that I have with Ethereum, which is like, I really like people at the foundation, and I like the foundation, but like the governance story for Ethereum is kind of a nightmare in a lot of regards. It's kind of the worst of both worlds. You have centralization in Vitalik because so many people just follow him, but then he's trying to offset that so he doesn't actually take full control over things, even though he probably should because he can. And so you end up in this weird situation where like with Yoichi and the EIPs, right, where Yoichi, I think, sort of correctly was confused about the legal obligation that he was agreeing to, and then like frankly that EIP, I don't know if that guy's here, I don't know what he looks like, the guy who made that crazy EIP, like that thing was a tire fire, like that thing's a nightmare. So like, if like legal issues aside, like if someone's like, Rick, like you have to edit and review this thing, and like it's really important, and we really wanted to get it done because it's really important to give people their money back. I'm sort of talking about this as if people already know the context. So the EIP was basically for how do you give people back their money because bugs in the code released by the foundation, in the most conservative case, have resulted in them getting their assets locked on the chain. So those people want to get their assets back, and we all kind of agree in the most conservative case that it's not really their fault because they trusted software that was released by the foundation and it lost their money. And there's a couple of cases where that clearly happened, or where there were clearly bugs in released code and then people lost money. And so we all kind of agree on a philosophical level that those people are entitled to their money because there's no way they could have. It would have been unreasonable for them to sit down and audit all that code themselves every time they updated the code to realize that there would be that bug there, especially considering the people who released the code didn't see the bug there, right? So we all kind of agree those people deserve their money, but then because we're all blockchainers and we all have some sort of brain damage, we hem and haw about how to give them the money back because we can't figure out, well, how do you make this into like a generalizable process for returning people's funds? Because how do you know if this guy in this other corner case way over here, if he was like actually cheating, or maybe this guy in this corner case over here, he meant to burn it, or like this, you know. And so we end up having this big long conversation, which I think is a valid conversation to have, but what you end up out of it is this ERP thing, which the basic plan for that is, oh, we're just going to have rolling patches that are just hand patches to the blockchain. So you're basically just going to say, like, hey, block 7,000 was screwed, man. Sorry, transaction 7 in block 7,000 was just completely wrong, our bad. We're just omitting it. And you just write a test in the client that says, is this block 7,000? Is this transaction 7? Pretend that's not in there. And you're like, wait a second, that's not, you mean to just do that in perpetuity? And the guy's like, yeah, we'll just do that in perpetuity. And I'm like, nah, that doesn't sound like a good decision to me. And I think a lot of people kind of had that same gut reaction that like, as much as we agree with the intent of that proposal, it was a really bad proposal because it didn't actually fix anything. It's just saying, this is how we're going to like cauter our wounds when we shoot ourselves in the foot. And it's like, hey man, why don't we like not have guns, or like not shoot ourselves in the foot, or like any other number of things that we can do as an alternative to that. And so Yoichi, for, you know, he made a legal argument for why he didn't want to participate in that process. But I think any person who, like, I mean, he does a lot of the static analysis, formal verification stuff for Ethereum, so he has like a very like holistic view of like how these systems work. And I think if you have that view, you realize that, you know, this strategy is just super unappealing. And I'm not trying to criticize that person. Like, I don't know what their background is. Like, maybe they're a 14-year-old kid, maybe they're a 40-year-old guy. I don't know what their deal is. I don't know why they came up with that idea. Maybe they have $60 million locked up and they are crying to their wife or something. They really need to get that money, and this is the best proposal they could come up with. Like, I don't know what their situation was. But as a community, like, it should be fairly clear that like the best solution is like change the process under which the code is released so that we can formally assert that these types of errors are impossible, and then have like a jubilee where basically, like, sort of as pittance, like the devs just go through and they get all the proposals and they get all the patches and they rewrite the VM, which is like obviously a huge task because it's on that list. You know, sometimes people will hide things in a laundry list. Like number 7 is like save the world, and like number 6 is like get eggs. So like, yeah, so rewrite the VM, but then, you know, after you've done that and you can assert that it's correct, now you can be like, okay, well, we're gonna do all these crazy one-off patches, but we can actually formally assert that we never have to do them again. Really, 5 minutes? Okay, no worries. So yeah, I'm not even halfway through things I don't like about Ethereum, but I only have 5 minutes. And I guess I should say the things like I do like about Ethereum. Well, I guess to me it's more like a compare and contrast, because I was so skeptical of Bitcoin when I started, and then I sort of met the Ethereum community, and I was like, whoa, that's terrifying. And so I took a step back, and I dealt with Bitcoiners, and I'm like, whoa, okay, no, there's some really crazy stuff in here too. I mean, like, for real, like, when I meet people in the Ethereum community, they're like nice, young, mostly white males. Everyone in here besides, well, okay, a couple of not white people here, but mostly males. Nice people, optimistic, ambitious, saving the world. When you go to Bitcoin conferences, like, real quick, someone will talk to you about some felonies. Like, real quick, like you barely know the guy and he's talking to you about laundering money. And it's like, I mean, that's cool, I don't mind, but that's kind of a weird culture to be a part of. So one of the benefits of Ethereum is people don't just immediately start talking to me about criminal activity when they first meet me, because that's like a big no-no for those of you who were here at the beginning of the talk. When I was growing up in the hacker community, that was like a kind of like a commonly understood no-no. 1 in 4 hackers is a federal informant. You don't just like show up to a meeting and start talking about felonies. It's kind of rude. And so the Bitcoin community's willingness to just jump into illegality and have this sort of radical conservatism, like radical conservatism is like a con of Bitcoin that Ethereum doesn't have. I think Ethereum is doing a much better job of trying to build a real community, trying to make like, it's actually way more ambitious. The other like pro con of Ethereum is like 100 times, 1,000 times more ambitious than Bitcoin is. I mean, Bitcoin is literally just trying to track like account balances and that's it. And Ethereum's like, no, we can do like a whole computer and it'll be run all over the world and there'll be fairies and it'll be wonderful and we'll forget about, you know, incompleteness theorems and impossibility theorems and all these other things. And it's like, that's really awesome, but it also means that you write a lot of stuff that doesn't work and anyone should have never thought would have worked. But how much time do I have now? I have 3 minutes, two? Does anyone have any questions? And is there something that you don't like about Ethereum and you want to see if I don't like it and I didn't mention it? Or do you want to try to defend one of the things I disliked about Ethereum? Don't do that, because we don't have time for that. But you can talk to me after this or whatever, and I'm happy to discuss anything about Ethereum or blockchains. I didn't really talk about federated proof of stake stuff because I rambled a little. But yeah, I'm happy to take a question about anything, really, anything. I don't watch sports. Politics doesn't really work. I'm in a different country. I don't know what's going on in French politics. Anyone? No? All right. You sure? No one, really? No questions? What about people coming in for the other talk? Do you want to know what this talk was about? Do you have questions about what this talk was? Oh, top 3. Oh, it's funny because I didn't even mention it. Transaction state doesn't bind to contract state. When you submit a transaction to Ethereum, you don't know what state that's going to be applied against. There's no effing reason for that, man. That's crazy. That's number 1. Number 2 is probably the weirdness between gas and ether and the fact that the pricing doesn't really work, because like you literally don't know how much your shit's gonna cost. Sorry, pardon my French doesn't work in France, but yeah, I mean, you just don't know what's gonna happen. I think it's a lot of, and there's some other gotchas like that. There's some other situations where you just don't know what's going to happen, and that doesn't make sense because I'll say this. This is one of these blurbs I like to say that I didn't say during the talk. Most programming is not safe. Is safe, but it's not secure. So if you're normally using your computer and you go to do 2 + 2, you know you're going to get 4, but maybe some guy in there switched your 2 into a 3 and you got 5. Right? And that's the risk that you have to worry about in normal computer systems. In Ethereum, it's inverted. You have extreme security. You know people aren't tampering with your values in memory, but you don't know what the state of the machine is, so you don't know what result you're going to get out. So it's really hard to assert safety in Ethereum compared to what you would naively expect given the marketing and what we understand of computer science. Like if you try to do the Venn diagram between blockchain marketing and computer science, you get this really weird shape that is not a nice little oval or like an overlapping circle, you get like a weird hodgepodge mess because everyone, Bitcoin, Ethereum, everyone makes some crazy claim, and then you're like, man, that doesn't sound like computer science really supports what you're saying at all. I mean, IOTA is a big case of that, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop talking.
Like this.
Hello?